Welcome to Section 4, a day in the life of a firefighter and recommendations. Let's talk about shift work, and let's talk about career first. So careers, you're assigned a shift. You hold on to that shift for as long as you work there. And say in my particular instance, I worked 24/48. Every day was Friday. You worked one day, you were off too. Every day was Friday. I could look at a calendar and know where and when I worked 10 years from now. Every third day I worked. So I went to work at 7 a.m. Sometimes shifts change at 8 a.m. Other departments, it really depends upon the department, and you'll have to investigate that through your sessions working with firefighters and EMS. I went to work at 7 a.m. That's when my shift started. I was there for 24 hours. You didn't leave unless there was some dire emergency, but you were there. Couldn't leave if there was a snowstorm or the water heater went out at home. That's the stress that you put on your family and your loved one or your spouse or partner. That is what they had to handle. Typically, 7 a.m., you do roll call. You check out your rigs. You make sure all the equipment is working and functioning, all the drugs are on the ambulance. And you have crews. You have an ambulance crew. You have an engine crew, a truck crew. What does that mean? Well, on an engine, 3 people minimum. Sometimes there's 2, depending on budgets, and that becomes a whole issue within itself within the fire service. How do you expect to put out a house fire when you only have 2 firefighters on an engine? But overall, minimum is 3, some have 4, and their responsibility is to take care of the engine. And we already talked about their job. Their job is on calls, for fire calls, to put out the fire, do search and rescue. A lot of times in the smaller departments, the engines will carry extrication equipment. And so on vehicle accidents, you got to pop doors and take roofs off. So very talented work there with an engine. Truck crews, they're the ladders. They handle the ventilation. That's their rig. They take care of it. A lot of times though, departments that are smaller, you have jump crews. So say you have an engine, a ladder truck, and an ambulance in your station. The 2 firefighters assigned to the ambulance, if there's an EMS call, the engine and the ambulance go out on that call. But if there is a smoke in the building or an automatic fire alarm, an AFA per se, if there's an AFA, the 2 on the ambulance then jump to the truck. And now you respond with an engine and a truck. And most departments, if they're smaller, say a single station, you'll have a shift commander, which is typically the battalion chief. They have their own vehicle and they run incident command. Bigger departments, that battalion chief might have 4 or 5 stations, and they respond to all those calls within that district of those 4 or 5 stations. You get to the big cities, they might have 6 or 7 battalion chiefs on each day, because there's so many houses that, in Chicago, there's over 90 stations. So you have to have all these different types of battalion chiefs located all throughout Chicago. So it really depends upon the size of the organization that the firefighter or EMT works with. So understanding that day in the life. So we check in our rigs. We make sure everything's okay. You wait for the calls and know we're not just sitting around on the lounge chairs. Our time comes later, after 5 o'clock. So we work a 7 to 5 or sometimes 7 to 4. Within that day, we pack in training and the calls, physical fitness. It was mandatory in our department and many departments that you work out. And if you haven't been to a fire station lately, there's some great equipment there, weightlifting and treadmills and bikes to keep us in shape. Because in that instant when you're at rest and then your heart jumps up from 60 to 150 beats per minute, it has to be in shape. Unfortunately, though, we see a lot of tragic things within the fire service for those who maybe perhaps don't work out. In line of duty deaths, the number 1 known reason is heart attacks. And so physical fitness is a key component in working. One question we are asked so many times is, how do you eat? Where do you eat? Guess what? You have a chef. You have a chef within your crew, and they are the ones who prepare the lunch and dinner. We pitch in money. Sometimes it's about $10, $12 a day each time you're on shift, and the crew goes out shopping, and they pick up their food. and they cook lunch and dinner. Many times, though, it's interrupted by calls, so it's just delayed. So within the training and the calls and the physical fitness, the day goes by pretty quickly. After 5 o'clock, it's our time. We can hang around the station, go to our bunk rooms, watch TV. Maybe a lot of us, we did a lot of our schooling while at the fire service, working on projects. So it's important to understand that you are a family. You are there together until 7 a.m. and then we go home. And so those are some of the differences because in career between bigger and larger, smaller departments. But how about volunteers? Many times as a volunteer firefighter, my wife and I will be shopping at the mall and the tones go off and I would have to leave her there. You're there serving your community. And when you carry that pager and the tones go off, you're gone. You leave your family. And that affects. Because once again, you are going to help people within your community. For these who have worked 25, 30, 35 years as volunteer firefighters and EMS, they've helped deliver children. They've buried people. And they become entrenched within that community and well respected within it. And it becomes very difficult for retirement within the volunteer program because that's what they're identified as your first responder. So volunteer work, it's the drop of a hat. Yes, we do training as volunteers. You have to hit a minimum amount of training each year. Otherwise, you lose your skills. And so it becomes a part of you. Let me share something personal. How we identify ourselves. I remember before I even became a volunteer firefighter, I was a truck driver for a school district. And I just couldn't imagine this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life until my neighbor asked me, said, "Hey, do you want to be a volunteer firefighter?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give it a shot." And they put me through EMT class and paramedic and firefighter academy. And before long, it was just, wow, I got bit by it. And I can recall telling people, "Hey, what do you do?" My first response was not that I drive a truck for my career to raise money for my family. I would say I'm a volunteer firefighter. And it's like, wow, you can get hooked that quickly. And it becomes self-satisfying for us to know that we are a part of something. And if you've been doing this for 15, 20, 25, 30 years, to understand, to lose that come retirement. So in that day of the life, when we talk about firefighters, it goes by in a heartbeat. We start out, we learn something, we help people, and then before we even know it, it's gone. So as therapists and counselors working, understand that retirement is a day in the life of a firefighter. FBHA tracks retired firefighter and EMTs. As of this date, we have tracked 155 retiree suicides. 35 of those took their lives within the first week of retirement. That loss of identity, that lack of belonging is real. So some of the recommendations, what can you do to become involved within the fire service and EMS? One of the things I tell people is fire departments are not going to come knocking at your door. You have to be proactive in this aspect. And things that we recommend, ride time. Ask your fire department or your EMS organization, I want to work with firefighters. I want to understand what they go through. Can I do some ride time? Just to understand. I don't want to go in maybe on the bad calls. I'll be sitting outside. I'll stand outside. But I want to understand the dynamics of what they go through and the conversations when they get back to the station of the things that they see and how they cope. Ride time is very important to understand the whole dynamics of when the tones go off to the time they get back to the station. What has occurred? Attend training sessions. Go out into your departments and say, hey, I'd like to sit in and watch how you do some hose training, ladder climbing, whatever training you're doing that day, extrication, cutting open cars, EMS, working full arrest, understanding the dynamics of the training sessions and how it comes into play. One big thing is have dinner. Go out and have lunch with the crew. I was teaching out in New Jersey a few years ago, right across from New York City. And during the nighttime, I went down to Times Square, and there's a station down there. And I stopped in. And I said, I was talking to the lieutenant. We were having a nice conversation out on the bay floor. And in walks this pretty Italian girl, long black hair. She had a Jets jacket on and torn jeans. And she says to the lieutenant, she says, what are we having for dinner tonight, Lou? And he says, well, Mario's making some pasta. She says, oh, great, I'll go in and help with salad, make the salad. She walked in there, and I turned to the lieutenant, and I said, is that one of your off-duty firefighters? He says, no, that's one of our EAP counselors. She has an office down the street, and our firefighters and our family members go to her. And I thought, how perfect is that? How perfect. The confidentiality to go and seek her when you have some issues, but yet she'd come into your station and break bread and have dinner. That is what I would like to see with you as therapists and counselors in working with fire and EMS. Another aspect that I really want to make sure that you understand is the credibility that we look for in counselors and therapists. By doing that ride time and knowing that you're there, wanting to understand who and what we are and why we do the things that we do, that ride time and attending training sessions, getting into the station, having lunch with them, just talking, brings that credibility that, hey, maybe this therapist or counselor really wants to understand and know who we are. And it builds confidence in the firefighter as well, that the trust that they can come see you. And you now know who we are and what we do. And that's accomplished through that ride time, through visiting the fire stations, getting to know who we are. The credibility really comes into play because, like I said, I've fielded calls from firefighters and EMS all across the country, and it's remote. There's no counselors in that area. So through the teletherapy, just letting them know, that firefighter, that you've done the ride time and you've spent time understanding the training sessions and understanding the lifestyle of the fire and EMS, that means a lot. It means a lot to that firefighter and EMS. Maybe provide training. Say, hey, we would like to talk to you, just to enlighten you a little bit about what behavioral health is in the world of counseling. Because there's so many firefighters that have no idea what counseling is all about. I used to work with firefighters. They would come in and sit down and say, okay, now what do I do now? I'd say, well, first off, I can't work harder than you. You have to come to me and we need to talk. I can't tell you where to go with it. I have to guide you to find the solutions and the issues that are bothering you. But I'll be here, I'll walk the walk. And so you need to provide that training to let them know what the counseling world is all about. One thing that I really like to see is that if you are working or if you work with an EAP, an employee assistance program, develop some type of online profile of all the counselors that work there with pictures, so that when the firefighter or paramedic is sitting at home and they can just go onto this profile and say, okay, well, this is what they have to offer. You know, Counselor Tom, he works with PTSD and anxiety and stress, and Counselor Sue, she's marriage counseling and depression. And it gives them some idea of who these people are and what they look like and what their background is. So once again, build some type of profile that you can give to the firefighters and paramedics. Go out to the communities, the fire and EMS, find out who they are, build a relationship, call the fire chief, introduce yourself, get involved with the training officers of the departments. They're the ones who put the scheduling together, the training. These are important issues. These will save lives. As I alluded to earlier, we've had no training in the fire service about behavioral health. Just a quick summarize as we go through the sections. This is straight from my heart. I commend you for wanting to get involved with my brothers and sisters. There's too many times and too many stories that I've heard. I've had firefighters call me on a Sunday evening and say, Jeff, we'd love to bring your workshop's up to our department. We've heard so many good things about them. How can we do that? How can we bring you to us? And then I find out 2 days later, this firefighter put a gun to his head and ended his life. And I sit and question myself, what did I miss? Was that a call for help? We didn't even talk about anything in that aspect. Confidential reports I get. I received one years ago. I called the fire chief, and we talked about his lieutenant who had taken his life due to relationship issues and addictions. We talked for over an hour, this fire chief saying this lieutenant was a good friend of his and how he tried to help him. After that hour hung up, I thought about the conversation and what that fire chief must have gone through since he had no training and trying to help out that friend of his. 6 weeks later, I get a confidential report. This fire chief took his life for marital and alcohol reasons. And so, if you truly want to help, you have to ask that question, can I handle it? Can I handle the pain and the suffering of others to this extent? Because it's very traumatic. The stories that we have within ourselves, and yes, they're not all suicidal, but where does it start? It starts with that loss of identity, maybe depression, anger, addictions, and if not taken care of, does it finally get to that point where they no longer want to live? Be direct, challenge with compassion when working with my brothers and sisters. Understanding our culture, understanding the reasons why we do the things that we do. The signs and symptoms, they're also important. Remember those top 5. But that doesn't mean that there aren't others. There are absolutely others. And then get to know your local fire department. Ride time. Get to know these men and women in the EMS world. They're great people. They absolutely are. And we don't want to lose any more than we have to. Thank you. We will now go into role play number 4.
Where are we starting today?
Well, as you know, the talk is retirement. I've had over 30 years in the fire service, and I enjoyed my work. Absolutely love it. But we just received some bad news, my wife and I. And I was retiring in about 4 months. And this past week, we got results back from her doctor's appointment, and she's been diagnosed with breast cancer.
I'm sorry.
And it's stage 4. And I guess I'm glad I'm here today because the confusion going through my mind is just unbelievable. I mean, retirement, we look forward to it when we're young. And as we get older, it's like, well, I'm not ready to retire yet. I've had a good career. I'm enjoying it. But my wife and I have always planned retirement. We're going to go out and travel. We're going to go do this, hang out with the kids and the grandkids. And I became angry, though, when I found out she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Angry about what?
I think angry at her for, these are the plans. These are our plans that we had been wanting to do for years. And now, this is what we're relegated to?
You're angry at her, or you're angry that she got cancer?
That's the confusion. I'm angry at myself for being angry. I'm angry at her for having the cancer. I'm angry at the cancer. I looked forward to retirement and spending it with her for so long.
You're angry about the plans being ruined.
Right.
About the time you could have spent with her.
Absolutely. And I don't know where that anger is coming from. And
let's answer the question then. Where is the anger coming from? Why anger of all things to feel because of cancer?
I've asked myself that time and time again. Is it robbing me of something, or us of something that we had planned?
What did you plan? You keep saying planned. What did you plan?
Well, just to be together, to spend time together. I mean, through my career, I worked every third day. I worked every third day, and I was gone a lot. I went to conferences. I was a state instructor, so I would speak all over the country. But I always thought, well, retirement, it would be our time, where we could spend time together.
Do you feel like you kind of neglected her previously?
Oh, I know I did. When you're gone a third of your life from someone, the one that is your better half, your husband or wife, and I always thought, well, retirement's going to be the time I'm going to make it up to her.
Why did you bank on? Why did you tell yourself, I can do this neglect, I can over focus on my career, to the point of feeling like it was neglect to count on this retirement piece? What?
Well, I think that's what most of us firefighters do. We look towards the retirement, and because we want to make up things, the holidays that we worked, the Christmas parties that we were gone, our children's parties, or maybe programs at school that we couldn't get off to go see them at, ball games, recitals. But we always thought, I'm going to make it up though at retirement. I'm going to spend more time with my wife and my children. And now I wonder if I will have that time.
Is your anger about guilt?
What do you mean? I don't understand that question.
Do you feel guilty for the choice that you made?
Of being a firefighter?
Of spending all that time in your career just to kind of catch up with your wife in retirement?
I don't know. I've never looked at it that way, and I don't know if that's an accurate statement or not. I mean, she always knew that this was my life and this was my role as a firefighter and instructor. And not to say that she knew her role, but she was a firefighter's wife, and she knows what comes with it.
What comes with being a firefighter's wife?
Well, that I'll be gone a lot. But we always, like I said, we always had these plans that we would be together and do these things and make up for the time that I was gone.
I can understand the disappointment, but I'm not sure about the anger. Why angry?
Because I think if she dies, I'll never have that chance to spend time with her.
That seems understandable, but I think I want to talk about how you spent your time before.
Time before what?
The time before this point, this retirement. You made a lot of choices to be overly involved in the fire service. And it's one thing to be upset or concerned that your wife has cancer or disappointed that you can't spend time with her. But to be angry, I just feel like I'm missing something.
Sometimes I wonder if I'm not just angry at myself.
For what, though?
Just for things that I've done.
What things?
Do we have to go there?
It sounds like we do.
What happens if I don't?
Then you may not have an answer. You may not be able to resolve the anger.
This is damn difficult to talk about.
What is?
The anger or guilt that I feel. That maybe I'm being punished, or my wife is being punished through my actions.
Being punished for what?
Probably for the numerous affairs I had throughout my career as a firefighter, traveling.
Explain that.
The many one-night stands at conferences and things. Thinking, you're just out with the guys and everyone brags and talks and they hit on women.
And you did this for much of your career? Part of your career?
Part of my career.
Are you saying that you're angry because you feel guilty for having affairs and now you can't spend that time, you can't make up that time with her?
She's being punished and I can't make it up to her if she dies.
So you were going to use retirement to make it up to her for the things that you've done, not only the neglect, but the affairs.
Absolutely. I thought it was my way of justifying my soul.
What do you mean?
That maybe I can do some good in my life, because having those affairs were just horrendous once I thought about them. I haven't done it for years, but I thought this was my way of erasing that and proving to my wife that I was a good husband, when I know that I probably wasn't.
Are you angry that you don't get your reconciliation?
I'm angry I don't get my chance to prove to my wife how good a husband I could be, and she's being punished.
I think that's a thinking error. I don't imagine that she got cancer to be punished for anything. Do you
It
truly
might be a
think
thinking
that?
error, but it's something I believe.
What do we have to do to help you see this from another angle? What is this really about?
It's just that I feel guilty for having the affairs, and I was going to make it up to her.
Can we just leave it at that?
But I won't get that chance if she passes away.
You may not, but then can we deal with that?
It's, I don't feel I gave her the best part of me.
You may not have, but can we talk about that instead of you being angry at her, angry at cancer?
Maybe it's just my way of just staying away from the problem, just thinking that it's my fault and that she has cancer, because I don't want to deal with the issues that maybe I wasn't the so-called tremendous firefighter and instructor and this and that, and then in my personal life I absolutely sucked.
I think you're being harsh on yourself, but if that's what you think now, that's what we need to talk about more than being angry at cancer.
I just want to know, how can I help her?
That
She doesn't
might be-
know anything about it. How can I make her life, or is that just being selfish of me trying to reconcile all the things that I've done wrong?
What do you think she needs at this time? As someone that you love and care for, what do you think
She needs a husband who's always been standing by her side, and apparently I don't think I've done that.
Can you do that now?
Absolutely.
Let's start there.
It'd be a good start,
It would be.
but then we got a lot to deal with my guilt.
I'd rather you deal with it, though, than try to push it away and blame something else, not ever resolving it. Whether she lives or dies, that's something that you're going to have to heal.
So where do I start?
With this anger about the guilt you feel because of the affairs.
Well, that's going to take more than one session.
One session down.
Well, let's start there then.
Very good.
So, in this role play, a lot was going on. What was going through your mind?
Correct emotion for, you know what I mean? Not that there is correct emotion, but like it doesn't make sense. And we could be pissed that cancer happens, to us, but there was also the element of I overworked, I banked on this time afterwards, and those are key pieces of the puzzle as to where the anger is coming from. And it is not uncommon that firemen feel guilty about the affairs they kind of get caught up in,
And I've worked with a lot of firefighters and talked to them. A lot of them have an image that's portrayed upon them of being that knight in shining armor, when in reality, are just human beings.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing to remember as a therapist and a counselor, that you are looking at human beings, not just that heroic firefighter. And those who are suffering, or what they've done earlier in their career, are now starting, hey, well, I'm a little older and I've looked back and my youth was a little wild, more than I wanted it to be, and now are starting to feel those emotions of, why, man, what did I do there?
Right.
And they carry that guilt.
Right. And average age 40. I definitely see that transition. And then as they get older, it's integrity versus despair. You know, do I have integrity? Do I feel good about how I did my life, my career, raised my kids? What kind of husband was I? Or are they in despair, like, man, if I can go back in time and change something? And that, in this case, with this client, there's just too much of the anger at cancer instead of concern. Or, you know, there wasn't a flow. If there was, you know, maybe not the guilt, it would be concern, and I love her and I'm sad, and there's anticipated bereavement.
Right.
But he wasn't anticipating bereavement, he was angry.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
it was a little clue.
And like I said, we're not going to solve these things in a session or two.
Right.
But we're just trying to give the therapists and counselors out there some ideas on how to approach situations. I love your method of, you know, being direct. Don't let anything go by that if it doesn't make sense to you, make sure you understand it. Do you have any last words of advice for therapists, counselors out there?
I think you have to kind of consider men's psychology. You have to consider the culture of the career. Everything that's going on around them, that, you know, there's always a point that clicks. You want your therapy to kind of click where you're like, I found the hot spot. Otherwise, you're going to lose your guys. And firefighters expect results. You know, if you tell them this might take 4 years, they're like, well, screw it. I'll be fine without you. And so when they come and sit across from you, don't be afraid to kind of get into that issue, identify it right away, and then do the therapy.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to thank Sarah Gura for her participation in the role play. And I also want to thank you for watching this workshop, The World of Firefighter and Emergency Services. We hope that you can gain some insight into working with fire and EMS. For any questions, please feel free to email me at jdill@ffbha.org. And for your certificate, send us an email to info@ffbha.org. I would like to thank you for your participation in helping out my brothers and sisters. Stay safe.